DawgNation. I'm Brandon Adams, and what a Wednesday it's going to be here on DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. I'm really excited about a special guest today. Our buddy John Stinchcomb is going to be back with us, the former Georgia great offensive lineman. We're going to talk offensive line a little bit on today's show. I think there are a few Georgia players that are underrated. I'll kind of explain why I think that's true. I think there are a few offensive linemen kind of in that mix. We'll decide together if I have a good point on this because, frankly, there's a chance I don't. But we'll decide all on our own kind of the merits of this argument together. I'm also going to try to be as fair and balanced as I possibly can about the Florida Gators. Someone has tossed a compliment Florida's way. I'll deal with that on today's show. And kind of some interesting kind of juicy rumor type stuff around the SEC. We'll do some of that later on here today, too. It's a fully loaded show. We're really glad you're with us. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I am going to do something pretty dangerous off the top of the show. I'm going to speculate. Now, for the most part, I kind of speculate for a living, but I'm going to speculate even more so than usual here for just a couple of minutes. I'm going to allow you to decide for yourself if this speculation is accurate. In fact, I'm even going to invite my team here together, Michael Carvel and Connor Riley, to join me in this speculation for just a moment. Let me start it this way. I make no apologies for the fact that I love lists. You know, I do a college football show every single year, every single day of the year. The off season, in a lot of ways, is about lists. It's about, hey, top 10 this and top 25 that, and in some cases, top 100. Apparently, that's what Sports Illustrated is going through right now. They are ranking their top 100 players in college football. They've started at number 100. They've worked their way to 51. They've even started giving out some of the snubs. I thought Connor Riley had a good piece on this yesterday at DawgNation.com. I hope that you will check that out. By the time you hear this, they may have already dropped the top 50 on all of this. And I like it. I like the debate. I like saying this guy's rated too high, this guy's rated too low. I just like all of that. And yet, in seeing what I saw from Sports Illustrated yesterday in its sort of first half of its top 100, I'm led to believe that there may be a few Georgia players who are underrated. Now, I'm not saying that it's an absolute crime against humanity that they may not be included in Sports Illustrated's top 100, but this may be one of those things where Georgia has a few players who are maybe better than their current level of fame would indicate. Now, in the top sort of back half of the top 100 that was released yesterday, 51 through 100, there were two Georgia players on the list. There was J.R. Reed on the list, the Georgia safety. That's kind of a cool thing to see. Not a huge surprise. J.R.'s gotten some attention the last couple of years. And Monty Rice was on this list as well. Now, I thought it was kind of cool to see Monty on the list because that's one of those guys that I thought a national publication like Sports Illustrated might overlook. But they didn't. They gave him the attention, and it just goes to remind you of just how crucial it would have been for Georgia had it had Rice playing healthy at the end of the year. That might have been a really good thing, but that's water under the bridge now. Here's the part where I'm going to speculate, though. If in the second half of Sports Illustrated's top 100, the names mentioned there are J.R. Reed and Monty Rice, then I think you can start to maybe make some educated guesses about who might not make the top 100 Sports Illustrated list. There are a few guys who obviously will. Jake Fromm's obviously going to be on there. Andrew Thomas is obviously going to be on there. DeAndre Swift's obviously going to be on there. Those are guys that you know are going to be there. But based on the fact that we've already seen 100 through 51, there are a few guys who I think might not make the list that I think are probably better than their current level of national attention would indicate. Does it make sense so far? Let me show you, if you're watching on screen, my list of underrated Georgia players. I've got safety Richard Lacount. I've got cornerback Erik Stokes. I've got two defensive linemen, Tyler Clark and Jordan Davis. I've got Solomon Kinley, Ben Cleveland, and Isaiah Wilson, the three offensive linemen. My assumption is that when the full list of Sports Illustrated names comes out, these guys will not make the top 100. Connor and Michael, do you agree with me these guys probably won't make the top 100? I'm seeing yeses. I'm seeing heads being shaken. And I'm obviously not going to tell you that Georgia should have 15 guys in the top 100. That's not my point here. I'm not trying to say that. But I think that all of these guys, to a certain extent, have a case to be made for being better than their level of national attention might indicate. And in some cases, the guys on this list that I'm sharing with you right now might even be better than even some Georgia fans might think. Let me start with the first name on my list. That's safety Richard Lacount. I know that there's a lot of excitement and attention from Georgia fans about what some of the newer safeties might be able to do at Georgia, whether it's a guy like Otis Reese from the class of 2018 or a guy like Lewis Seen, an incoming freshman from the class of 2019. There is a lot of anticipation for what Reese might be able to do in an expanded role and what Seen's going to be able to do when he's on the field for the very first time this year. And I get all of that, and I, to a certain extent, kind of join you in that level of excitement as well. However, if you're asking me to kind of cast my lot with a safety who's going to break out in a bigger way for Georgia this season, J.R. Reed, to a certain extent, is kind of a known commodity. Who's the breakout guy going to be? I'm still casting my lot with Lacount more so than any of the younger players for right now. He's still kind of my guy there. And I saw what you all saw a year ago. Richard Lacount saw this. The missed tackles and the moments in which he could have and probably should have been better than he was. But here's the good news. Of all the people talking about what Lacount maybe didn't do last year, what he needs to be better at in 2019 on the field, there is no one talking more about that than Lacount himself. Go back to this past spring. Mike Griffith, looks him right in the eye and says, hey, what are you doing to kind of make sure that you are a better tackler this year than you were a year ago? And Lacount took the answer head on. Here's one of the reasons why I think Lacount's overall game may be a little bit bigger than his national fame, because it seems like Lacount's pretty focused on making his junior season an impact one for the Dogs. Here is Lacount in his own words.
How much have you put on in the offseason? It looks like you've been more physical since the Sugar Bowl, maybe the effort to beef up the tackling or strength. What have you done in that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. That was a point of emphasis doing off-season training. I try to put on at least 15 pounds. So since January, I have put on 12 to 15. Just keeping on bulk, being able to be more physical at the point of attack and tackling, going back to my fundamentals, basic tackling, being able to help the team, because that's the main reason why.
Can you tell the difference when you bring it now?
Oh, yeah, I definitely feel better. I feel more confident in my strength and things like that, because I feel, that I put in a lot of work to be able to, change that problem that I had last year.
So when a former five-star recruit is now more focused than ever, stronger, bigger than ever, I'm sorry, there aren't 100 players in the country I'm taking over Richard Lacount. And I do realize what Georgia also has at safety, and I'm, I guess, excited about those guys too. But if we're drafting a Sandlot team to go out and play against each other, I'm not letting 100 picks go by before I draft Richard Lacount. I am just not. I think he's one of the top 100 players in the country. I could say the same thing for Erik Stokes as well. It's not a surprise to me that Stokes is not on this list. He didn't, wasn't a full-time starter a year ago. I truly think that he's one of those guys the media will find out about over the course of the year, and that's to be expected. There are always guys who are better than their fame would indicate. I think Stokes is kind of definitely one of those guys. I think the same thing is probably true about the defensive lineman as well. Now, I know the defensive line overall has been a little bit of an issue for Georgia. I do get that. But let's go back to last spring. Why do I think that Tyler Clark and Jordan Davis are worthy of maybe being on the list of underrated players, the kind of guys that don't get top 100 attention that maybe should? Because Kirby Smart, in his own words, has kind of described these guys as potentially difference-making defensive linemen. That's something that he's talked about himself. And if you are a difference-making defensive lineman on a team that could compete for a national championship, that would put you in the group of maybe top players in the country. Here's what Smart has said in the past about both Davis and Clark.
Difference makers. I think Tyler Clark's a difference maker when he wants to be, when he's playing really hard and playing quick. In a very unique way, Jordan Davis is a difference maker. I mean, he's not explosive and quick, but he's a mountain of a man, and he's hard to move. And in the SEC, you need a guy like that.
Yeah, so listen, I mean, if Kirby Smart's saying our difference-making defensive linemen are guys like Clark and Davis, then they're going to be on an underrated list for me when they don't get top 100 attention. I'm not necessarily surprised they don't get that look there, but I do think they are probably better and maybe more important to Georgia's championship fortunes than most of the national media probably indicates. However, if you want to get to truly underrated and maybe to the extent that there were true snubs for Georgia, or likely to be true snubs once the full list comes out, I do think it's on the offensive line where you've got the biggest and best overall case to make. Almost for sure Andrew Thomas is going to rank very high in Sports Illustrated's top 50 when it comes out. But as I said before, Guys like Solomon Kinley and Ben Cleveland, Isaiah Wilson, I don't necessarily expect to see on there. But you can't be among the best offensive lines in the country if you don't also have among the best offensive linemen. This is not just a situation where the sum total of all the parts adds together and equals something great. The individual parts themselves have to be pretty good too. Obviously, Thomas makes everybody better, but Kinley's among the best guards in the country. I think Cleveland is even underrated in comparison to Georgia fans, much like some Georgia fans are excited about what's behind Richard Lacount on the depth chart at safety. We hear some of the same kind of stuff about Cleveland over the offensive line, and yet much the same way I'm kind of betting on the veteran on defense with Lacount. I'm going to bet on the veteran on the offensive line when it comes to Ben Cleveland as being one of Georgia's 5 best, which is to say nothing of the other tackle, Isaiah Wilson. I understand why Thomas gets the most attention in comparison to the two tackles. He played first, and he's played great, seemingly, in every game that he's played. But as Isaiah Wilson explained himself going back to the spring, just because Andrew Thomas got a head start doesn't mean they won't both finish in a pretty good place. Wilson's been very honest. The learning curve for him coming into college was steep. But he gained a lot of ground a year ago, and to the point this year, if you don't have him among the most important players for Georgia and among the top in college football, then I do think you've overlooked a pretty important component of that. Let me let you hear Isaiah Wilson in his own words.
I think my first year, like any high school senior going to the SEC program in college, you have to get over the little hump and adjust and reacclimate to the SEC. So my first year was a learning curve. Second year, they gave an opportunity to go out there and play ball, and that's all I wanted to do.
So I like that from Isaiah Wilson. I really like his attitude, and I think that Isaiah Wilson is a really sharp-looking offensive tackle for Georgia this season opposite Andrew Thomas. So can I do this? Can I show my list one more time here? I'm not saying it's a crime against humanity that these players don't end up being top 100, but I do believe compared to the national attention they're getting, they're probably better than many reporters realize. On defense, I'm going to give you Richard Lacount and Erik Stokes, the 2 defensive backs. I'm going to give you Tyler Clark and Jordan Davis along the defensive line, and 3 offensive linemen, Solomon Kinley, Ben Cleveland, Isaiah Wilson. These are not among the most famous players for Georgia, but they are truly among the most important. And if Georgia wins a national championship this season, these guys that I just mentioned will be a big reason why. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us. Live on video today, 10 a.m., DawgNation. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. We're also on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rep, and we are available as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just really glad to have you with us. We got a really fun special guest coming up. These offensive linemen I just mentioned, we'll talk to him about those a lot. That's John Stinchcomb, the former great offensive lineman on our program today. Can't wait to do that with you. Before that, though, let me remind you about what's coming up on Thursday, August 1st. How about DawgNation Days of Summer? And how about the big announcement we made yesterday that right now you can go to DawgNation.com. It is live. You can get involved and get in on this at DawgNation.com. The link to register for your chance to win a VIP stay giveaway courtesy of Brasstown Valley Resort and Spa. You got to get in and do that. Your chance to win is going to be a lot of fun. And by the way, if you want to be a part of our VIP reception that night that starts at 5 p.m., if you kind of want to secure your spot as a VIP for DawgNation Days of Summer, don't just wait for the giveaway to see if you won. I'm going to give you between now and Friday to get in, get your room booked, and be a part of that. We have already sold more VIP rooms than we had allotted. So as of Friday, my bosses are telling me there are no more. We can make no more room in the VIP situation, so please do that by this Friday for your chance at that. Brasstown Valley Resort and Spa is just a beautiful place. There's also like 4 golf slots left. You can go to dognationhelp@gmail.com if you want to find out kind of more about that. It's all going to be a ton of fun. I cannot wait for DawgNation Days of Summer, Thursday, August 1st at Brasstown Valley Resort and Spa. All right, let me go around the doghouse here for a second. Brought to you today by my friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And I want to try to be fair and balanced about something if I possibly can be, because I do think it's important sometimes to try to, look and say, like, what are you missing? Is there something that I'm personally missing here? Because I've told you all before, obviously I'm a Gator hater, and I got all kinds of Gator hater paraphernalia here on the desk every day when I do the show. And yet, even with that said, I do truly believe that Florida will be a preseason top 10 team that finishes the year unranked. It is fair to point out that not everybody feels that way. Chip Patterson, CBSSports.com, writing about Dan Mullen this week, says that Mullen's got the roster to overcome Georgia and get the Gators back to the SEC championship game. And doing that in 2019 would likely carry far more long-term significance than Jim McElwain and his consecutive trips to Atlanta in 2015 and 2016. So here we got a guy at CBS. I actually know Chip Patterson a little bit. I think he's a pretty good guy. Here we got a guy from CBS who says, Dan Mullen's got the roster to get it done against Georgia here in 2019. Now, I am firmly of the belief that this is mostly wishful thinking. I am firmly of the belief this is mostly just the media, much like our buddy Pete Butak, who we've talked about before, who just kind of want the SEC East to not be boring, and Florida rising up would prevent that from happening. But is there a chance I'm wrong? I mean, is there a chance that Florida really is better than I think that they are? I mean, clearly they've got some talent on defense, right? I mean, they're bringing back a lot of their productivity a year ago. They're bringing back a total of, I think, 8 starters, I think. Offensively, they got a crop of wide receivers. They're bringing back a decent number of their rushing yards from a year ago. They're bringing back their starting quarterback in Felipe Franks. It's really interesting to look at Franks in his first year working with Dan Mullen, compare him to Dak Prescott in his first year as the full-time starter at Mississippi State, and look how identical these numbers are. Is there a chance I'm overlooking some of this? I want to deal with this more later on in the show. Frankly, I think I'm probably right, but it's probably fair to at least sort of give a little credit to the argument others are making about Florida. So we'll kind of dive in that and do that a little bit later on. For now, though, let me remind you that Around the Doghouse is presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Solutions is an important word here, because when it comes to the crack foundation you may have in your house or something along those lines, what Engineered Solutions of Georgia wants for you is a simple solution to that problem. They're not going to look to just upcharge just because they think they can. They want to solve your problem. Now, if it is something significant, the good news about Engineered Solutions of Georgia is they have a full-time, actually two full-time engineers on staff to help get that done for you. So you want to give them a call today. Simply dial 678-ESOG now. 678-ESOG now. If you've got a crack foundation, a damp basement, wet spot in your crawl space, anything like that, the company to call is Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Get in touch with ESOG by dialing 678-ESOG now. All right, good to have you with us here on DawgNation Daily. We'll do more on the Florida thing later on. For now, though, let's talk to our good buddy, John Stinchcomb. And boy, it's great to have him back here on DawgNation Daily. Always a fun guy to chat with. John and I are actually going to be teaming up for a video series. I can't tell you too much about this yet. This is all very secret and hush-hush, but you're going to be looking for this coming up in the days ahead here at DawgNation.com. I think you're going to really like that, and I can't wait to do this with John Stinchcomb. John, welcome back to the program. Really appreciate you being with us today, and I hope you're doing well.
I'm great, B.A. Always a pleasure.
So let me start with this. I want to talk some offensive line in a moment for you with you, but let me kind of start on a subject I was just kind of on a moment ago. John, I make no bones but the fact that I'm a Gator hater. Obviously I don't want Florida to do well, and yet as objective as I can be, as fair in my analysis as I can be, I think that Florida's got some problems on the field this season that would lead them not to be as good as their preseason rankings is going to indicate. However, when you hear somebody, and I just read from a CBS writer a moment ago saying, this Florida roster, it may be good enough to take down Kirby Smart in Georgia. Let me ask you, to a certain extent, Florida is more experienced than Georgia, especially now that Georgia's lost its top returning receiver in J.J. Holloman. Does that experience that Florida has, does it give it a potential edge against Georgia when these two teams tangle later on in the season?
I wouldn't describe it as an edge. I think it plays in your favor if you've got some experience, but experience can only go so far when you talk about talent. And I think if you look on paper, there's really not a whole lot of comparison that can be made for the amount of talent that Georgia will be fielding as compared to what Florida is going to put out there. And I think very highly, sadly, of Coach Mullen and his staff. Their ability to coach the game of football, they can do it at a very high level and get the most out of their players. But they just don't have the chops that Georgia has and the amount of players and talent that Georgia will put on a field. So, yeah, I mean, historically it's been a big rivalry, and I'm glad that the tables have turned because there's not the same equity in talent between the two teams.
Yeah, because, the one thing that even Florida fans would admit is while they have some experience, a lot of position groups, the one place they don't have a lot of experience, the one place they will be breaking in some new starters is along the offensive line. And obviously, John, you as much as anybody know that the one area in which you don't want to have a lot of question marks going into a season is with your line of scrimmage on offense. That's the kind of thing that can potentially upend any team. And for Florida, I think there's a very good chance that's true. I would not want to be going into the wars of the SEC not too sure about my offensive line, but under a best-case scenario for Florida, that's going to be the case this year.
We've been there before as Georgia fans, where you've got that unknown and that question mark resides in that front five. And it's not a pretty pleasant place to be because, it takes a concerted, congealed effort to produce. And anytime as a quarterback, if you're always looking at where that next defensive lineman's coming to tap you, then you're not able to make the plays. And that's the beauty that a veteran group with talent can offer the quarterback and running backs that they protect. And Jake Fromm, I'm sure, is very appreciative of the five that he's got in front of him. And as we well know, it's not just five guys. There's probably 7, 8, 9 that are starter caliber that he's experienced being protected by, and that's a thing of beauty for that offense.
Well, speaking of offensive line, let me talk to you a little bit more about something I was discussing before you joined the show. We know that Andrew Thomas is going to get a lot of national attention, and he should. He's likely a first-round pick. He's, a candidate for, every major award you want to throw his way, and that's all well-deserved. And yet the point I was kind of making, John, before you joined us is that among the other offensive linemen, if Georgia's going to be an elite offensive line, that's not going to be true because of just one guy. That Solomon Kinley, I think, is a really good player. I think that's been proven, and, some of the sites like Pro Football Focus have measured that out. I think that Ben Cleveland has, in his healthiest moments on the field, been a pivotal part of some really big wins for Georgia. I think that Isaiah Wilson was an incredibly solid right tackle a year ago, despite the fact that he doesn't get as much attention as Andrew Thomas gets. Would you mind for a second talking about those other guys? And I'm purposely not including Trey Hill in this because I think that Hill's a good-looking center, but we've seen less of him than the other guys. So it's really these other three that I want to address with you. What have you seen from Kinley? What have you seen from Cleveland? What have you seen from Isaiah Wilson? Of the sort of returning starters for Georgia, they are less heralded than Thomas, but in their own ways, I think they've made names for themselves. What have you seen from these guys?
Well, it's a special group, and one of the reasons why Andrew Thomas gets the attention is because his game projects to the NFL really well. He's good in the run game, but the way he moves in the pass game and really came in as a freshman last year, true freshman, and his balance, his control, his footwork was that of a veteran. Somebody who's been in the SEC 3 or 4 years, and his ability to take on some of the better pass rushers that this country sees in the college game almost effortlessly was very impressive. Then he makes the switch over to left tackle and did that pretty seamlessly. So there's a reason why he's heralded as a potential first-round pick, if not, top 10 guy. And it's because of the way his game translates to the NFL. You look at the rest of the guys, Solomon Kinley, in my opinion, is one of the best true guards in the SEC. And he's not, he fits the role of a guard and does it exceptionally well. For Ben Cleveland, I tip the hat to Coach Pittman in seeing what he had in Ben Cleveland because he was a highly recruited tackle coming out of high school, and his transition to guard has been one that is had to be deemed a success and fits his game much better than, you look at him, he's huge. He's a huge guy. He's like 6'7", one of the bigger taller offensive linemen on campus in Athens, but yet has been playing guard. You watch him play, he's able to bend. He's a flexible guy. So, that's your concern when you see a 6'7" player play inside, and he's been able to do it at a high level. And in my opinion, Isaiah Wilson, for what Georgia does and their desire to lean on folks and create space in the run game, it's a perfect fit for how Isaiah plays. I mean, he's a guy that if he gets a chance to maul someone and gore them into the ground, he's going to take it. And that's the kind of personality that Georgia has created over the past couple of years with their offensive front is we're going to pound on you, we're going to lean on you, and then take our shots. Now, Isaiah, he's got all the talent in the world and will continue to develop, and probably why he's not mentioned yet in the same vein that Andrew is because of his pass protection, and it's something that a skill that you develop, and I've got no doubt that he's going to take another step forward in the pass game from where he was the previous year.
And just to follow up on that, I think what's really cool about that is, Wilson and Cleveland in their own right were elite recruits, so seeing them play well, to a certain extent, not necessarily that big of a surprise. Kinley, on the other hand, though, was probably viewed as more of a project when he did sign with Georgia in the 2016 class. And, John, you know this. When people look to poke a hole in Kirby Smart's resume, one of the things they're going to try to do is say, well, we know he can recruit, but can he coach them up when they get on campus? But when you see a guy, being tutored by Solomon Kinley, who really is playing better as a collegiate player than his high school profile would have almost, predicted for him, that is an example of player development, is it not? Now, you can say the same thing about defense as well, where three-star defensive backs like DeAndre Baker winning the Thorpe Award. But just to keep it to your position for a moment, when a guy like Kinley is a relative unknown, and now you just described him as one of the better guards in the SEC, doesn't that go straight to player development? And isn't that kind of a feather in the cap of Pittman, who's already got a great reputation, and Kirby Smart as a young coach who's able to say, yeah, not only do I recruit them, I develop them as well?
Oh, without a question. I think that's one of the best developments that the athletic program's done over there is, for a number of years, we had some turnover. We've had good offensive line coaches come through. Stacey Searles is one of them, and there have been a few others. But when there's turnover, you don't create the same consistency. And in my opinion, I think Sam Pittman's arguably the best offensive line coach in college football. So Kinley is a prime example. And in my opinion, Ben Cleveland as well, a guy that Coach Pittman had a vision for and sees, I've got a space for him. You can say the same probably of Cade Mays, who was a highly touted tackle and gets some of his first starting opportunities at guard. And that's not an easy transition to make. You've got to learn the ins and outs and intricacies of a position change, going from space at tackle to grinding and the power game that comes from being an interior player. So player development is a huge, I think, advancement in Georgia football. You look in years past, they came in pretty talented and they left almost the same. And I don't want to speak specifically in a derogatory way about some previous coaches, position coaches, but you can't deny the fact that it's been a major upgrade for us to have Coach Pittman and his ability to take a player from where they're at and build on what their strengths are. It's funny. Sorry, I know you get me on my soapbox, but
Please.
With Solomon Kinley, he probably wasn't that, baseball term, five-tool athlete that had all the pieces, but which would get you all the stars and everything else. But I mean, he's a guard, and there's a spot for those guys. I mean, he may not be able to stretch out and play tackle and create length and take on some of the more athletic defenders, but in this system and for his shape and what he excels at, he's become one of the strong players, interior guys for Georgia, and that's a testament to him for knowing his game, and then coaches for recognizing the skills he has and put him in a position to succeed.
Yeah, I think that's really true, and I think that's very well said. Let me finish up with this. Next week is kind of one of those final corner polls we have to get around before the start of the upcoming season. It's SEC Media Days in Hoover, Alabama. I apologize for not remembering. John, did you represent Georgia at SEC Media Days at any point? I'm assuming 2002. You would have very likely been one of the speakers on Georgia's behalf. Did you go to Hoover in SEC Media Days back then?
I did. Yeah, that was the first time. I think it was Coach Rick, Boss Bailey, and myself. Maybe can't remember if Terrence Edwards was on that flight as well, but it was. It's pretty nerve-wracking as a young man, and you're on those tiny planes. You feel like you're flying sideways the first time. That's what I remember most. Holy cow.
I'm sure there's also probably a crazy collection of questions as well. It's probably wilder now than it was then. It was a pretty big deal even back then, though. I was going back during some of those years as well. But I'm sure, that many microphones in your face, that many people asking you questions, it does take a little getting used to, I'm guessing, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Not to mention, you've got beat reporters from all the different schools constantly baiting you for that one-liner that you can they'll post on their bulletin boards when they get back home. So, there's plenty of landmines when you get there of guys trying to bait you and say some things that are inflammatory.
Well, John, listen, it's great stuff. You were obviously a great representative for Georgia. No better person to speak on behalf of the program then, and it's fun to talk to you about these things now. We got some fun stuff we're going to be doing together, and I can't wait to tell people more about that. But for now, I just wanted to say thanks for being with us here on DawgNation Daily, and I'll look forward to speaking to you again very soon as well.
I look forward to more to come, BA. It's going to be fun.
Yes, it is. That's John Stinchcomb there, just a great, great friend of DawgNation. And you'll talk about, listen, I made no apologies for being a fan of this program, and while I am not a UGA graduate, I do appreciate people who represent the university well. I'm talking about beyond just, hey, that guy was a good football player and then won a Super Bowl. I'm talking about beyond that. Guys who are, choosing to make Georgia their home and choosing to work to make the university community better. John does those things, and I just think that's a cool thing to be a part of. And I love what he said about Solomon Kinley there at the end. And I think one of the untold stories, and Georgia's not the only program that does this well. There are a lot of programs that do this well. But one of the untold stories about college football is the way that these programs through science can change the bodies of the players who come in. This time of year, you'll see these Instagram photos pop up, and you're like, wow, gosh, so-and-so has gotten so much stronger. And in some of the cases, some of these big guys like Solomon Kinley, over the course of their career, they slim down more. Georgia's not the only program who's good at that. I think it's probably fair to say that Georgia's better at that now than it used to be, though. That's probably true. But, Kinley's one of those guys. And Kirby Smart, you can go back and listen to some of this stuff, especially before the 2018 spring practices, about how, Kinley took it on his own to slim down his body and be serious about that. I'm guessing it's probably a little bit easier to take a big guy and slim him down than it is to take a small guy and beef him up. I'm guessing that's true. I might be wrong on that, but that's my assumption. It's still nonetheless cool to see how good Georgia has been at transforming these bodies, taking what the guys bring with them from high school and then turning into something that can be effective at the college level. That's one of the real stories for why Georgia has put itself in the position where it's at, and it's a nice thing to see.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, really fun stuff there. Always love when John Stinchcomb's here on DawgNation Daily. I got some stuff for the SEC Through I think you're going to like there as well. Before we get to that, let me remind you about my friends at Kroger. They've got you covered right now for upcoming summer road trips. You can save on everything you need to keep the kids happy. Let me tell you something. I was just on a road trip to the beach and back, and keeping kids happy is a big part of the story. Well, how about this from Kroger to do that? How about 10 for $10 Swedish Fish or Sour Patch, 2 for $3 Lifesaver gummies, or 2 for $7 Hershey miniatures. Just throw that. It's almost like you're going to the zoo and you're kind of feeding an animal in the petting zoo. Just toss that candy back in the back seat every now and then and keep the kids quiet. It's probably kind of a nice way to roll down the road. A little savings on some candy at Kroger. And that's not a bad way to kind of keep the kids quiet and happy and get them watching their iPads or something on the way to a vacation. I actually love that. Really good job there from the friends at Kroger on all of that. All right, let me talk about a couple things here for a moment. Let me start where I left off, and then I'll pick up some of the rest of these SEC stories. So I was talking before about, when you see the CBS writer Chip Patterson and others saying, hey, Florida's a threat to Georgia. Florida's a threat to Georgia. You just heard me talking to John Stinchcomb about that a little bit. I mean, I do think I have an obligation not to just come on here and be rah-rah and, do the Eddie Gator hater stuff and just say it's all a bunch of bunk. I think it's fair to question that. And, obviously Florida's experience on defense probably matters. It's probably going to be a pretty good defense. This is a living, breathing defense. Maybe not as good as it was maybe in some of the Jim McElwain years, which is kind of a funny thing to say. But still, this is a competent defense, especially with the secondary. Florida seemingly always pretty good there. I actually like some of the wide receiver talent that Florida has. I think that's a fair thing to bring up. As I told you before, I was doing some research on this yesterday. It's amazing, statistically side by side, how similar Felipe Frank's stats were a year ago to Dak Prescott at Mississippi State in his first full year starting for Dan Mullen, back there in Starkville. And some Florida fans are going to tell you, and look at the jump that Prescott made in his next year. That's the same jump that Felipe Frank's going to make this year, and it may happen. Here is the thing, though, I think you got to question. And this is where my skepticism in Florida really kind of comes in on all this. It is true that maybe Felipe Franks will grow in his next year working with Dan Mullen, much the same way that Dak Prescott did. But the question that's fair to ask is, was Dak Prescott a special college quarterback, or was Dan Mullen a special college quarterback coach? Because a lot of Florida fans want to tell you, boy, Mullen's great when it comes to working with the quarterbacks. But the evidence you base that on is Tim Tebow, who is undoubtedly a special quarterback. Let's face it, Mullen didn't exactly prepare him very well for the NFL, but Tim Tebow's a special quarterback. You certainly admit that. Dak Prescott may have also been a special college quarterback. Whatever happened to Nick Fitzgerald? Whatever happened to him? He was a preseason All-SEC in 2017, and by the end of the year, essentially looked like a converted safety playing the position. Somehow that quarterback whisperer stuff that Dan Mullen didn't seem to impact every quarterback that Dan Mullen's coached, which opens the door to some at least skepticism that Felipe Frank's going to have the big jump that he needs to be competitive in the SEC. Because Frank's a year ago was no better than average. This is fewer than 50%. Fewer than 60% completion percentage. Made some nice throws, made some terrible throws. He's essentially just the median SEC quarterback. About half the quarterbacks in the league last year were better than him, and he's probably better than about half of them as well. But if it's not a big jump from Felipe Franks, this is not a super dangerous offense. When you look at Mullen's past, this idea that every quarterback that he's touched has somehow blossomed and done great things, evidence doesn't necessarily back all that up. And the fact that Florida does have kind of a suspect offensive line, I think that makes that even more questionable. All right, let me do a couple of other things here, kind of fast. I thought there was I saw this at the Spun yesterday. So Tom Hicks, who at one point in time was the Rangers owner, is he still the owner of the Texas Rangers? I think maybe he is. Is he still the owner of the Rangers? I honestly don't know, but I think at one point in time he was. So he goes on like some random podcast, and they get into a discussion about Nick Saban and how apparently Saban in 2013, after the 2012 season, came very close to taking that Texas job. Apparently Mac Brown, according to the story that in the podcast that was written about at the Spun, according to Mac Brown, Brown did not sign off on this whatsoever. The money quote here was that Brown said he didn't want Saban coming to Texas and winning a national championship with his players, as if Mac Brown's roster at the end of his run there at Texas was some dazzling thing like that. So maybe I'll put a link to this. I thought that was kind of a juicy, rumory type story. The overall point here is, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but it's worth remembering that we look at the Nick Saban era at Alabama as if it's just been this perfect run of pristine football with every Alabama fan happy every step of the way, and Saban happy with Alabama every step of the way. Honestly, it wasn't always the case. I mean, yes, 2012 Alabama had won the national championship, but Saban was feeling like Alabama fans apparently weren't all that appreciative. And remember, in 2013, this Alabama offense had a lot of questions. This was not a great Alabama team necessarily in 2013. They were kind of stuck in the same offensive rut that LSU was. It's really the transformation the program underwent when Lane Kiffin came in 2014 that really changes all of that. So it's important to remember that, this dynasty that everybody aspires to, Alabama, along the way, things haven't always been perfect there in Tuscaloosa. At one point in time, maybe even, according to Tom Hicks, Saban was fairly strongly considering going somewhere else. All right, let me do a couple of other things here real quick. Our buddy Ben Wolk had this on Twitter yesterday. Malik Willis, the former Auburn quarterback who lost out in the quarterback competition to Joey Gatewood and Bo Nix. Those are the two remaining guys there at Auburn, who will eventually, one of them will become the starting quarterback. Malik Willis has found his new home. He's going to go to Liberty, where you'll remember that Hugh Freeze is now the head coach. And I don't know if he's going to get immediate eligibility or not. I at this point in time, I don't even know what the rule is anymore. It seems like it's kind of been weirdly adjudicated. but that's what Malik Willis is going to do. I would be curious to see what Hugh Freeze could do with an SEC-level quarterback, even if it wasn't a starter-level player. I'd be curious to see how quickly Hugh Freeze get that Flames offense running down up there in Lynchburg, Virginia. And I'd be kind of curious to see how good Malik Willis really is, because at one point in time, Auburn fans had a little bit of excitement about him. They obviously waned on that and kind of turned their attention to the other two guys. But listen, Malik Willis playing for Hugh Freeze at Liberty, that's not a bad show. I wouldn't mind seeing some more of that. I mentioned the Chip Patterson thing before, what he said at CBSSports.com about Dan Mullen and Florida. This comes in an article about other second-year coaches around the country and the expectations for them. Mullen was among his with the most to gain. There are a few SEC coaches he mentioned that have the most to lose. One of those is Jeremy Pruitt. And I understand where this is coming from. I don't think the ceiling for Tennessee is very high. I do think they could be better than some people think. Winning record this season, bowl eligible. I think that's a possibility for Tennessee. Some people don't even think that they could be able to do that. If it's not much better than that, though, if this is another year where they don't even qualify for a bowl, I think it is fair to say that Pruitt does have a lot to lose there, because below the surface, Tennessee's actually got a little bit of recruiting momentum. Look at a guy like Rick Gilbert as an example. Tennessee has an inroad with him. They've had other inroads with Elite Four and five-star type players. It becomes harder to sell that, though, to even guys like that if you don't have some success on the field. And for Tennessee, it's not going to be easy. They play, a tough SEC schedule. Patterson also mentions Joe Moorhead. I think Mississippi State may be a disaster this year. I think the shine could come off Moorhead pretty quickly. He mentions Chad Morris there as well. I'm actually a little higher on Arkansas than some people might be. And then the other thing that Chip Patterson says at CBSSports.com is the pressure's kind of deferred on Jimbo Fisher, meaning that he doesn't face a lot of second-year expectations. For the most part, I think that's probably true. He is recruiting well enough now to keep Aggies fans happy, and I think even in a sort of a college football crazy spot like College Station, there's got to be a little bit of a sense of realism knowing that they've got Clemson, Alabama, and Georgia on the schedule. Now, I'm sure A&M fans think they're going to win all three of those games. But boy, that's a pretty talented roster that's playing an incredibly tough schedule. I think the real measuring stick for Jimbo Fisher probably comes more like year 3 and year 4 than what might happen here in year 2. But we'll make that your SEC through at least for now. Let me do a couple more things before we get ready to wrap up the program here today. I thought it was interesting that recently ESPN has updated its FPI projections for the upcoming season. This is kind of like one of their mathematical formulas where they kind of tabulate all the efficiency stats and things like that, and they can use those to make some fairly accurate predictions about how things might play out for the various college football teams this year. Georgia's third in the FPI projections for ESPN this year, and Georgia has about I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's a 2.5% chance of going undefeated this upcoming season. Now, I've said before that I think that Georgia will have a 12-0 regular season, and despite the fact that there's only less than a 3% chance of that occurring, I still think that's not a crazy radical opinion to say that Georgia might do that this year, but it is worth pointing out that ESPN is not super high on Georgia running the table for all 12. How about Clemson? They have almost a 50% chance of going undefeated, a very similar statistical profile to Georgia. You think an easier schedule doesn't matter. The ESPN FPI data tells you everything you need to know about that. For our video audience, let me show you one more thing, too, before we get ready to go out the door here. You may have seen this new craze that's out there where guys and gals try to do the back kick type, karate type thing, and they try to kick the top off the water bottle. One of the best ones I've seen came from Ryan Trouble Davis. Now, he's been kind of recovering from an injury situation. The fact that he's as good as he is doing this probably speaks pretty well of his return to health here, looking pretty good in that video. Pretty good video work as well. I don't know who shot this, but to get the slow motion spin of the bottle cap as Davis kicks that. Now I realize if you're listening on the radio, the podcast, you can't see a lick of this, and I apologize. But pretty good job there by Ryan Trouble Davis, kicking off the top on the energy drink bottle there. By the way, around here we are Gator haters. We make no apologies for that. 984 days. That's our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a good day. We shall see you tomorrow right here on DawgNation Daily. And on video. Good to have all of you with us for our R.S. Andrews cool down. And boy, it has been hot. And there is nothing that you want more in the middle of a hot summer than a cool house. And if your house is not as cool as it should be, then you need to get the $99 R.S. Andrews Smiley Tune-Up. Why is it called a Smiley Tune-Up? Because story after story, R.S. Andrews has been delivering smiles, and they can deliver smiles for you when you check them out online at rsandrews.com. Dari and the gang, they're just good folks, and their trained techs will get you smiling again. So you got to reach out to them. Don't sleep in a hot house all summer long. Get in there and get that thing tuned up. $99 is all it takes. rsandrews.com. All righty. Let's do YouTube first. I did a bunch of Facebook comments off the top yesterday. Let's do YouTube first and see what they're arguing about today. What's going on over here on the YouTube side of things? Will asking about Julian Rochester. Yeah, Rochester's going into his senior season, and I think at some point in time this week I may do something more. It's kind of funny that you bring up Rochester, Will, because at some point I think I'm going to talk more about Julian Rochester. We didn't see him this spring. He was injured. But on that list of potential difference-making defensive linemen for Georgia, I don't think there's any doubt that Rochester ought to be included in that group. Now, the level of play has probably kept him from being mentioned among the top guys there in that regard, and that's probably true. But in terms of a big breakout to close out his Georgia career, based on the profile coming out of high school, Rochester would seem to be one of those guys that might be able to do that. I think I'm going to talk more about Rochester here at some point in time. Deloach Approach says, I think that Rochester could be a beast. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of those things where it's undeniable potential. Now, if you want to question the results, that's probably fair. I think even Julian himself would say that he's got, more to do to be better. But in terms of the potential, not everybody has the ceiling that Rochester potentially has. It's a pretty high one. And he's almost a little bit of an out of sight, out of mind guy right now because he wasn't around much during the spring, at least in terms of on the field and practicing to my knowledge and understanding. So yeah, that's one of those guys that we probably will focus in a little bit more on when it comes to the start of the upcoming season. Danny Blackman says, am I the only one that watched the Sugar Bowl when Georgia beat Notre Dame for our only national championship game? I'd actually be curious of that. How many people who are watching us right now were remembering and seeing that game? Not only was I not really, I was alive, but I don't really remember it. I'm not actually sure I've ever seen the entire game from beginning to end. I know a lot of the stories, Herschel dealing with the shoulder injury and things along those lines. I don't think I've seen that game all 60 minutes from beginning to end, which is probably a really bad thing. I will say that you can go back. Now, this is pirated video, so I don't condone this, but if you were to stumble on YouTube across the Georgia-Notre Dame game from 2017, the opening they did to start that telecast was hot. Am I allowed to say that? Is that am I okay to say that? That's not too much youthful lingo. Connor says just barely crossed the line on that one. It was I'm just talking about a spectacular opening. They kind of used some of that stuff in that. It was great to see. Larry Young says he watched the game with joy and excitement. You better believe I'd be watching with joy and excitement too if I had been around for that, and hope to see that some this year. I'm thinking it's going to be a night game for CBS. I really hope they do as good a job telecasting this one as NBC did a couple years ago. Tirico he's just great. Mike Tirico is just a great play-by-play. That broadcast is just great. It was a beautiful early fall in Saturday night in South Bend, so that helped. I'd forgotten that the hurricane stuff was such a big deal that weekend. I was fixated on what Georgia was doing, admittedly, and probably wasn't paying enough attention to national news. There's a big hurricane that weekend. I'd forgotten about that, and they talk about that a good bit during the broadcast. But what an incredible telecast. Tom Gross says, "Can you speak up, please?" I'm not speaking loud enough. That'd be the first time that's ever been true. Am I really not speaking loud enough? Tram Dog says Caleb Williams 2021. Yeah, I know that Caleb has been pretty active on social media, I think, as of late. Yeah, Caleb's one of those guys that seems to be some growing excitement with. Danny Blackman says Charlie Warner's uncle picked Notre Dame to seal the deal. Yeah, that's kind of a fun thing to think about there, that great interception. That's the one highlight I think you probably see more than anything else. Green Soldier says a night game versus Notre Dame in Athens. That's awesome. Couldn't be better. Yeah. I just think that the CBS theme song, I'm one of these guys, I like these like orchestral theme songs that the various networks have. I just like all that stuff. I just grew up such a big fan of television that all the little television trappings are still, I'm just love them. And I'm not going to hum the CBS theme for you because I'll mess it up. I'm not very musical in that regard, but I love, y'all all know what it is. The da 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 da. I said I wasn't going to do it, and I just did it. But to think that music's going to play, and they're going to open up full, overhead shot of Sanford Stadium as the sun's going down, because it's still going to be early enough in the year that it won't be completely dark yet at 8 o'clock, I don't think. But, basically the sun's almost completely down. What an incredible look that's going to be. Brody L says ABC has the best broadcast in his opinion. I'm not a big fan of the ABC broadcast anymore. Connor Riley has said before that he doesn't think that Chris Fowler is a great play-by-play broadcaster, and I guess I kind of agree with that a little bit. I don't technically think he's bad. I think he was way better as the host of Game Day than he is as the big play-by-play voice. I don't like the ABC stuff as much as I like the other networks. I will admit that I guess I probably don't just stay glued to Notre Dame games when they're not playing Georgia. I'm sure that's probably easy for y'all to understand. I didn't realize the NBC broadcast was as good as it was until I watched the Georgia game. I just didn't know it was that good, but it was great. I thought it was great. And I think the CBS broadcasts are just exceptional. I think Brad Nessler is a terrific play-by-play guy, and a guy that you're talking about a guy that just eats and breathes the SEC. I mean, he's absolutely that way. I liked Vern as well. Vern's because I like the Masters. Vern's one of those guys that always has a special place in my heart because of that. I thought he was good doing the SEC games. Even some of the flubs and mess-ups I thought were just, kind of par for the course. I know a lot of people don't like Gary Danielson. This is one of those things where if the same guy keeps coming on TV long enough, you eventually find some love for him, and Danielson's been in that spot long enough now that I'm kind of fine with him, even though, he's not what I think of as the perfect SEC analyst. There are a lot of guys that could probably do that job better than Gary does. I've sort of just grown to expect him in that spot because he's been there for as long as he is. So we shall see. Jason Hester says, I kind of like Danielson, and he loves Fromm. Now, Todd Blackledge is a different story. Dean Butler says, Vern was okay, Gary not so much. Yeah, Gary's one of those guys that when you give opinions, you're always going to rub somebody the wrong way. And, he's also one of these guys who'll say the wrong name from time to time. And, it's always a challenge when you're doing a game, and virtually or at least the large majority of the people who are watching know the teams better than you do, because y'all know the Georgia roster better than Danielson does. No matter how much time he spends preparing for it, y'all just know it better, and because you kind of live and breathe it. And so people like us are going to catch the mistakes from a guy like Danielson more just because of how attuned we are to the Georgia roster. Let me get some Facebook comments. Demetrius Isom does not like Gary Danielson, and I'm not surprised to see people saying that. Much the same way with Nicole House over here, who said virtually the same thing. A YouTube commenter said that she always loved Vern, but not Gary. Yeah, Gary's not super popular. Drew Dotson says, I love Brad, but the chemistry with Danielson's not that great. I mean, would my dream pairing be Nessler with one of these guys that just eats up the SEC and just feels as strongly with the SEC as some of us do? Yeah, that'd probably be a dream pairing for me. I'm not going to lie about that. Wally Foster Jr. says the 2017 game versus Notre Dame was a defining moment because Georgia, honestly, Notre Dame played a better game, but Georgia exemplified a rare character that's become common. I missed the end of the game in South Bend. I was pleasantly surprised when I saw we won 2019. And Wally, I kind of agree with you. And that was one of those games, I think, not to say that I'm right about everything, but going into it, I think I had a better sense of the game itself being more important for Georgia than maybe some people realized, because on paper, it appeared to be a matchup of a team that had won 8 games the year before versus a team that won 4 games the year before. But there was a lot of reason to believe that Notre Dame was going to be better than it had been. They'd lost a lot of close games the previous year, for instance. There was some thought they'd bounce back due to that. And when you looked ahead at the Georgia schedule, Butch Jones was struggling. Jim McElwain wasn't great. Mississippi State was a winnable game for Georgia. You thought, wow, if you can get past this tough road game, then things kind of open up for you for a little bit. Now, I would have never imagined that it would become what it became, but I will say I did have a little bit of foresight into that win being bigger at the time than maybe some people, certainly around the country, would have thought that it was.
Yeah, we've got a little bit of breaking news here.
All right.
The SEC, it's not really breaking news.
Okay.
The SEC has announced which players will be attending the SEC Media Days. Do you want to take a stab?
Yeah, I will. I am going to go, because we debated this yesterday about whether or not it would be all seniors or whether or not it would be juniors. I'm going to say Georgia is sending Fromm, Thomas, and J.R. Reed.
Correct. All three.
Right.
3
all
for
right.
3.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
List. Some other guys are going to be there. Jerry Jeudy, Dylan Moses, Tua Tagovailoa from Alabama, Derek Brown.
Not a surprise that Alabama's not sending Najee Harris.
Yeah.
Not a surprise.
Cash Daniel from Kentucky, guy who made a lot of waves last year. Joe Burrow from LSU is going to be there. Right. Kelly Bryant will be representing Missouri. Your favorite SEC quarterback, Jared Garantano, is going to be there for Tennessee.
He's not my favorite.
And then Kellen Mond is going to be there for Texas A&M.
It's not bad. It's a pretty good collection.
List. Yeah.
There have been some years where there were less star players than that there.
Yeah.
Did you say Tua Tagovailoa is going for Alabama?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Yes, that's a pretty good star list. I think we may do something on SEC Media Days for a little bit tomorrow. I'm of the belief that the average fan does not care at a lick about SEC Media Days. It is not on his calendar whatsoever. But I thought John was exactly right with what he said a little earlier, that it is essentially a battle between player and media, coach and media, with the media just trying to draw the team representative off sides in some manner with some kind of question possible. What do you think, Connor, the 2 or 3 big questions next week will be?
I think Georgia and Jake Fromm's going to get a lot. Jake Fromm they're going to get asked a lot about beating Alabama, and is this the year to make it happen? I believe. I think we're going to hear a lot of questions about Tua and his ability to stay. Tua's going to get asked a lot about his health and his ability to get and stay healthy.
I think Alabama's just going to be asked a lot of questions about Clemson in particular.
Yes, that as well.
I think they'll be asked a lot of questions about Clemson. I mean, really, Kelly Bryant at Missouri actually is going to probably end up being a pretty big story. Mm-hmm. He left Clemson. There's the whole postseason ban that Missouri's potentially dealing with. I bet Bryant ends up being one of the bigger attractions for these reporters who all like to write the same story. I bet Bryant ends up being a pretty big attraction for them. Who is Florida sending?
Florida is sending, I believe Felipe Franks is on there. Hold on, I'm pulling it back up. It is Felipe Franks, LaMichael Pirine, and Jabari Zuniga. Okay,
that's not a huge surprise.
Yeah.
I reckon that's probably who I would have thought. I guess no C.J. Henderson. Is that a little bit of a surprise?
Yeah. I believe he's only a redshirt sophomore, if I'm remembering correctly. So in that sense, kind of. There is one freshman that is being sent. Do you want to?
Oh, this is good.
One freshman. He's a redshirt freshman, but he's still a freshman.
Who is this? I'll try to be very, very quick on this. Who is this? Who is this? I'm going to be very, very...
He's got ties to Florida.
I'm going to be very disappointed for not getting this, but no one's coming to mind right now. I'm going to be really disappointed, but no one's coming to mind.
It's Matt Corral.
Is that right?
Yep. Ole Miss is sending Matt Corral. I find that very interesting.
I do too. Because just out of sheer candor, I didn't necessarily know that leadership qualities were necessarily one of Corral's strengths, but you're not.
Yeah.
But you're not sending him to SEC Media Days unless you apparently think he's got that going on there, or maybe just Ole Miss just doesn't care one way or another. That's really pretty interesting. Really pretty interesting. Matt Rovina says that he hated living in Washington, D.C. because all the local games with the garbage ACC, Wake Forest versus Virginia, woohoo. That is one of the things about this day and age that's better now. I'm guessing, doesn't pretty much every cable provider have the SEC network now? Are you getting the SEC network in D.C. now?
Yeah.
The ability to watch all these games now is so much easier than it used to be. I mean, can you imagine if you were living outside of the typical SEC footprint and you were having to deal with, like, the Raycom game of the week and you had, as he said, Wake Forest versus Virginia? That is not great. Not great. Kathy Aquavia Green says that Matt's going to be a good pick for Ole Miss. It's interesting that he's going. I think that's really pretty interesting. You think anybody will ask Matt Corral about Georgia?
No.
Does anybody care about that anymore?
No, I don't think so. I think you might get more questions about Florida.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Nathan Edwards says, BA, which is higher this season, Harry in rushing yards or Anthony Edwards points score? Over doing cross sport bets here. I'm guessing Anthony Edwards has a really big season for Georgia, but I'll admit I don't really know. Like, what is a typical total of points for? Like I don't even know what a total number of points for Edwards.
So
what would be good?
Let's say Georgia plays 35 basketball games this year. And let's
Can he get 700 points?
Anthony Edwards, 20 points a game.
Can he get 700? Is that reasonable?
Can Anthony Edwards get it? If he's as good as projected, I certainly think so.
How many SEC guys average in a 40-minute game average 20 points a game?
Let me look this up a year ago. Now,
Blaine Williams checking in from Rhode Island. Blaine, appreciate that.
I think one thing to watch with Edwards and why he might be able to get to 20 is because Georgia under Tom Crean does play at a faster pace.
Yeah.
And that'll sort of help him, just more possessions, more shots.
Plus, Edwards going to have that ball in his hand, y'all. He's going to have that ball in his hand.
Yep.
I think that if we're saying 700 for Edwards, I think that Harrigan gets more than 700 yards. I love that. I love a cross-sport prop. That's a great question. A great job.
There was not a single player in the SEC last season to average more than 20 points a game.
So did somebody average 20?
No one averaged. Averaged 20. So.
I'm gonna give you Harrigan plus that, but I'm not gonna say it's impossible that Edwards gets to 20. Would Edwards have been the best player in the SEC last season? Is he better than the point guard at Kentucky, the one that almost came to Georgia?
Oh, Ashton Haggins. I think Grant Williams was the best player in the SEC last season, and I'm not just saying that because he's a Celtic now.
Would Anthony Edwards been the best player in Auburn? Would have been the best player on Tennessee?
He would not have been the best player on Tennessee. I do think he would have been the best player on Auburn.
Yeah, so I think he's got a chance to average the 20 points a game. Now I'm saying that as someone who doesn't really know how many guys even average 20 in a 40-minute game even anymore. I think it's a possibility, but the overall crux of the question, I actually like Harry at more than 700 yards. Barry Watkins also asks a good question. Which Georgia sport team wins the next championship? Now, I won't admit to being an expert on some of the other sports, but I do think it's safe to say that of all the sports on the Georgia team, now this sprinter that's coming in, maybe that changes that. The football team is the most positioned for a national championship, right? It's not women's basketball. I don't believe it's gymnastics. It's not really baseball, although I guess they're still in the mix. I'm sure the men's track team will be among the national favorites. This Matthew Bowling kid seems to be the Herschel Walker of track. So I'm sure they'll be among the national favorites. But there's really no program that's better positioned for a national championship at Georgia than the football team is, right?
The women's tennis team did win a national championship last year. They won the indoor national championship. However, to answer the question, I do believe it is the football team, largely because I think they are winning the national championship next year, and chronologically, that national championship is before all those other ones get
and a lot of people are mentioning, Ray Brandon and others mentioning women's tennis, Jimmy Cooper as well. Please don't yell at me, y'all. Please don't yell at me for this. I'm going to plead ignorance. Is winning the indoor championship the same thing as winning the national championship?
It's still a national championship. But to answer your question completely, no. Like winning the one in May at the outdoor that is more impressive.
These sports that have 2 seasons are really confusing to me. Now, the golf stuff I kind of understand a little bit more, but like tennis has like 2 seasons. Doesn't track and field have a fall season as well?
I know golf does.
Yeah, and that I kind of understand a little bit more. Those are mostly just exhibitions, right?
Yeah.
Like the linger longer and stuff like that. Those are mostly just exhibitions. But these sports that have like 2 seasons, because there's an indoor track season too, right?
Yep.
I don't really understand all that, but y'all don't yell at me because I'm trying to be honest. But so in other words, the stuff that's indoor is not as important as the outdoor. Is that correct? Outdoor is where the real championship is won. Because teams like Stanford, for instance, they don't even necessarily have an indoor tennis team, do they?
Well, I mean, it's still the same team. It's just it's played indoors, and that's why it's considered a indoor championship.
Cliff Hancock says, Rice, Lacount, Reed, we all know, BA. Who on the defense under the radar that has the best capabilities to step up as that leader on the field that you desperately need? In your opinion, that is, well, the name that you didn't mention that I think has got to be included there is Erik Stokes. I mean, at this point in time, Stokes is a known commodity for Georgia fans. As I said during the top of the show, not a known commodity nationally. But he's one of those guys that the national media, those that are paying close attention anyway, I think will acquaint themselves pretty quickly with. And along the lines there of Cliff's comment, Connor, what did you think about my list off the top here of the 7 guys? I'm not saying all 7 should have been top 100 players in Sports Illustrated, but they are better game than their national fame.
I'm pulling up the list right now. I'll go line by line. I think Lacount is properly rated right now. Now, he could end up, becoming a bigger name, certainly at the end of the season, which I think your larger point was. But, in turn, like the way I thought of it is, all right, if Lacount is in the top 100 players at the end of the season, I think that kind of means J.R. Reed might not be, because I don't think it's, necessarily a recipe for success if you've got 2 safeties that are making a ton of plays all the time, because that's usually not a good sign for the rest of your defense.
Probably true.
Erik Stokes,
but teams like LSU, for instance, have had 2 like lights out safeties at the same time. So
right.
it's not an unheard of thing. But
Right.
I get your point.
Erik Stokes, Georgia fans might actually be overrating him a little bit. He has only played 5 games at this point. He's getting a lot of hype, which it is justified. He played very well to end last season. But given that he's only started 5 games, he only really started 5 games. I think it's hard to call him underrated at this point.
Here's what I think about Erik Stokes. This is a very weird thing to say. But let's say we put SEC football players in an octagon. Stokes is one of those guys that I think could find his way around there pretty well, despite the fact that he's not as big, as strong as almost anybody he'd be fighting. It's an overused phrase to say that guy's got some dog in him, and I'm probably not hip enough to even use that phrase. Stokes has got something, though, man. He's
There's something about him.
Got a little something. I mean, I interviewed him that one day, and I was like, man, I like this guy. After not really having that much of an opinion about him one way or another. And y'all know I was kind of in the tank for Tyson Campbell a year ago, and I'm not off Tyson necessarily. But boy, I like Stokes. I like him. Blaine Williams asked about Georgia's backup quarterback situation. He's concerned about what happens if Fromm gets hurt. Blaine, I totally get that. Here's what I believe. I don't think that Georgia is in all that worse a position if Fromm gets hurt than if any of the other national contenders gets hurt. Like, for instance, at Ohio State. Ohio State's very much a national championship contender. If Fields were to get hurt, are they really better off with, like, Gunnar Hoke? Or they have another transfer as well. But, do I think that Gunnar Hoke is a better quarterback than Stetson Bennett? I don't have any reason to necessarily believe that. Yep. Mac Jones at Alabama, I mean, that's a guy that's been in the program for a while, but would I feel better about Georgia without Fromm if I had Mac Jones in my backup? Honestly, not that much better. There are a lot of people who tell you that Jones is a better player right now than Bennett would be, assuming that Dwan Mathis is fully healthy. I don't even know what the status of that is. That's way too early probably to tell. But, if he were to be fully healthy, no surgery recovery, people will tell you I'd rather have Mac Jones than Dwan Mathis. I don't know that I feel that way. I think we are in an age now where if any national championship contender loses its starting quarterback, that team's going to be in trouble. And I think I'm going to write about this at some point in time, which is probably the last thing that'll ever happen. But injuries at quarterback have actually played a pretty big part of the story in the college football playoff era. This is not the NFL where none of these guys seemingly ever get hurt anymore.
I believe of the 32 Week 1 starters last year, 15 of them did not complete the season.
Okay, so that's more than I would have thought it would have been.
Yeah.
I kind of think of the NFL now as kind of a safer place for quarterbacks. Matt Ryan, for instance, doesn't seem to get hurt very much. But anyway, but injuries at quarterback have kind of been a big story. Wasn't it 2 injuries that led Cardell Jones to be Ohio State's quarterback in 2014?
Braxton Miller and JT Carrot.
And then Jones obviously leads in the national championship. Let's not forget that Georgia's a big part of this too. Georgia made the playoff in 2017 after a quarterback injury. Mm-hmm. And I'm not telling you that injuries are good, because that's just 2 examples where injuries seem to work out. But Alabama, quarterback injury last year played a role in their story.
Alabama make the playoff if Tua Tagovailoa doesn't exit the game last year. So
this is one of those weird things where every national championship contender is essentially crossing its fingers, hoping their starting quarterback doesn't get hurt. But in the 5-year history of the playoff, quarterbacks have kind of gotten hurt. Yeah. Chris Branham says something has to make me laugh. I didn't see his comment, so I don't know what was supposed to make me laugh.
Brian Kephart.
Oh, that's pretty good. Let me get Chris Branham's comment here. This is pretty good. This is a cheap shot, but I'll allow it. He says, not sure why Felipe Franks was invited to SEC Media Days. Any answer he throws back to the media will just go right over their heads. That's good. I like that from Chris. Good job. Comment of the day.
Brian Kephart with a good question. If James Cook ends up being our second leading rusher, will something have gone wrong, or will his progression have been
That's a good question. I'm going to say the competition is deep enough that I don't believe it's an example of something going wrong. I think that's an example of something going right for James Cook if that happens. But that is a really, really good question. Now, listen, Georgia's had some crazy years where, Jim Donnan can tell you all about this. Go back and look at Donnan in 1996, probably, when he lost Edwards and he lost Torrin Kurtzy and he lost blah, 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 and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. Georgia's had bad luck at the running back position before. You lost a bunch of guys. But if we're in December talking about James Cook as Georgia's second leading rusher, then I think that's more about the idea of a lot of people saying, see, I told you he's better than y'all realized, more so than it is, oh gosh, through attrition, Georgia was left to only having James Cook at running back. That's what I personally believe. Do you agree, Connor?
I do agree. I don't think that, I could easily see a world where Cook, really impresses. I think the maybe one thing against him is that his body type is similar to that of DeAndre Swift, and they're going to be used in a same role. So, I think the similarities with Cook might actually be like the thing that ends up holding, or the similarities with Swift might be the thing that holds up Cook from really making an impact this season. But, a year from now when Swift is likely off in the NFL, you maybe have a big back in Zamir White, you have a big back in Kendall Milton. I think, Cook next year could really be, a really interesting piece, and maybe even a better version of what Georgia had with Swift in that 2017 season when he was still a really, really good player. There were 2 other transcendent Georgia running backs.
Marcus Bass says he's in the same boat with me as far as LSU winning the West. He's got Georgia versus LSU in the SEC championship. My LSU prediction yesterday has actually been better received, Connor, than I thought that it might be. I haven't been laughed at too much for that. It's nice to hear Marcus kind of in the same boat with me. Now the question becomes, and I'm sure Marcus is wrestling with this himself, if it is Georgia LSU in the SEC championship, is Alabama sneaking around the chicken coop again and getting into the playoff as a non-SEC winner for the 3rd time in the Nick Saban era? That's one of those things we'll have to wrestle with and try to figure out on our own. But just generally speaking, LSU toppling Alabama in the West, my prediction of that yesterday, people haven't exactly passed on that as much as I thought they might.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people who are quietly down on Alabama, just given how, the 2018 season ended for them, where, Georgia moved the ball pretty well on them. Oklahoma moved the ball pretty well on them. Clemson just took a blowtorch to them. In that game, I was looking at the box score earlier today. You realize that the score going into the 4th quarter was 44-16.
Wow.
Like Clemson didn't score,
That's
and
tough.
they easily could have in that to make it a 50 burger and all that. And I think there are a lot of questions right now about sort of Alabama, just given how last season sort of ended and all the coaching turnover, because we talked about it during the Clemson game, and sort of the aftermath of that, and the coaching, consistency with Clemson and instability with Alabama was something that sort of, hindered, I think, Alabama to an extent. Well, Alabama just flipped its whole staff again, so that, that instability is still there. There's still not going to be that same consistency. So I believe this is Tua's third different offensive coordinator. Four if you want to count Lane Kiffin, who was the guy who recruited him there. So, I can certainly see why some people, just given the coaching turnover there, which was sort of labeled as the issue to why they lost to Clemson, could continue to be an issue for Alabama in 2018.
I'm kind of workshopping a medium-sized take. This is not quite as quaky as the last take, but I'm working on this. By the way, Frederick Jones listening from Anchorage, Alaska, ready for some football. I heard it was really hot in Anchorage. I'm not even being funny. I heard it was like in the 80s in Anchorage lately. Frederick, is that right? Am I making that up? But I'm happy to have you checking in there from Alaska for sure. But here's my medium-sized take that I'm working on. I haven't quite done the math on all this yet, but I'm tossing this out there as a hypothesis.
Okay. Not a take. Just for the people out there, this is not an official take.
This is a hypothesis. I'm going to test this. Kentucky to finish last in the SEC East, from top 15 a year ago to last in the division this year.
I can certainly see that.
I'm workshopping that one.
That's good. I have some questions with Vanderbilt. Now they have a lot of. They might have. In terms of triplets, they might have the best trio in the SEC in Keyshawn Vaughn, Kaija Lipscomb, and Jared Pickney. Those guys are all really good players.
That's kind of what I'm thinking. But they could keep them out of the cellar.
Yeah. And defensively, while Derek Mason's team doesn't have a lot of talent, he's still a pretty well-regarded defensive mind. I think so. I think that's sort of going to be the thing that keeps them out of the cellar, as to say. Yeah,
I think that could save them there. And frankly, I think Missouri's probably pretty good. I think that one of those relatively close games I could see Florida winning is I actually think they're going to have a good bit of motivation against Kentucky this year. I think that's a problem for Kentucky. I kind of see Kentucky last in the SEC East. I don't think I'm going to get 1,000 retweets for just for saying that, because nobody really cares. But I'm kind of working on that a little bit.
Is this a medium take? Missouri will finish second in the SEC East this year.
That's a pretty good take. I think that's pretty good. Will says he could see Florida losing to Missouri as well. I mean, I think that's probably kind of where I'm going as well, because I've told you all that I'm a little down on Florida compared to some of the rest of the country. Missouri's second in the SEC East. I don't mind that. One of the things I do think will be interesting next week at SEC Media Days, how many people don't pick Georgia to win the East, and how many people have Florida as something worse than second, because the most common ballot you could fill out, and by the end of the week, all the media that takes time to fill out their ballot, I almost never do because it's just takes too long, but almost all the media that is there will fill out a ballot, and they'll tabulate those votes, and that'll be the preseason SEC predictions. And there's usually a couple doofuses that put something crazy out there. How many people do you think will not have Georgia winning the East? It's actually probably fair to ask how many.
So
people
last
did this
year,
year
so
ago.
I've got.
Do you have the preseason predictions last year?
I have last year's preseason predictions pulled up. Last year, let's see. I'm trying to do quick math here. So 14. So there were 285 votes cast.
Okay.
271 were for Georgia to finish in first place.
That's about what I expected.
14 bozos picked picked a team other than Georgia to win the East last year.
That's about what I expected. Do you think it'll be more than 14 this year?
Yes. I think Florida alone will have more than 14
That's
votes.
really interesting. How many people did not pick Memphis Dog says Connor on the job. That was a really fast Google search. I got to give credit where credit's due. That was a very fast Google search. How many people did not pick Alabama a year ago? Do you have that in front of you?
More than you would think. 69 people picked Georgia. Nice. Auburn had 14 votes. South Carolina had 4 votes. Florida had 2 votes.
Yeah.
Mississippi State had a vote.
So it's fair to say, I mean, when I tell you they will let anybody in the SEC Media Days, they will let anybody.
They'll let us vote.
Yeah,
we're gonna have votes.
Yeah, I mean, like they let even us vote, like podcasters vote. So they'll let anybody vote. So it's not that unheard of to have a smattering of votes for someone else. But I am a little bit curious to see how many non-Georgia votes there are, or how many people. This is a little bit harder to tell because all they do is average the votes. But kind of where kind of Florida kind of lands on all of that. Kind of interesting. All right, we're going to get ready to Green Soldier asked a good question. Why is there more doubt in 2019 about Georgia than there would have been last year? So Green Soldier, my answer to that is, and this may seem like a cop-out, but I really just believe it's true, is the media is desperate for something new. And if I was doing this show and another SEC team was kind of, seemingly the rubber stamp pick, I'd be desperately trying to make a case for somebody else either. I mean, I did pick LSU to win the SEC West. Some people might say that's fatigue-based because people are just kind of tired of, Alabama, although Alabama's only got a one-year streak of winning the division. But you know what I mean. I mean, I think that this is a fatigue-based issue where Dan Mullen in year 2, it just seems reasonable enough that people can kind of talk themselves into it a little bit. I don't think it's based in science. I don't think it's based in a whole lot of measurable data, but I think it's close enough that it's worth making that case for.
Remember how a lot of people like to say that, a lot of media people, they like to come on and try and present themselves as smarter than they actually are.
Yeah.
Something I think Dan Mullen likes to do a lot as
sure.
well. 2, I think, there was a time a few years ago when people were trying to make the case of who's the second best coach in the SEC. This is before Kirby Smart obviously took that up.
That's a good point.
A lot of people like to say Dan Mullen.
Oh, yeah. He was
the
smart guy choice.
Yeah, sort of the smart guy choice. So I think because of that, I think there's going to be quite a few media contrarians that are going to try and say, make the case. They're going to try and make the case for Dan Mullen. Or say, ignore all the stuff that's happened with that program this offseason. Here's why Dan Mullen and Florida are going to beat Georgia, even though Dan Mullen has struggled historically against Kirby Smart and his defense.
I think generally speaking, the media likes Mullen better than it likes Smart. They don't have anything against Smart, but Smart is one of these guys that essentially plays a version of bully ball. Let's get all the recruits and let's just go out there and just suffocate an opponent. And while that's a really good recipe for winning, buying into that as the best coaching, philosophy is not exactly all that exciting for a lot of people. But Dan Mullen, who's, won some games with 3-star recruits and kind of done, some things like that, coach media members feel smart for picking him as a coach. And so if there's a chance to pick Mullen over Smart, I believe a lot of people will do it. It's the same reason why the Academy Awards pick some French film over a comic book movie for the best picture, because it just seems smarter to like this movie better than that movie. There was a version of that with Dan Mullen and Kirby Smart. I think you'll see some of that play out. It doesn't even really make me mad. It just kind of is what it is. Media members like to sit around and think about how smart they are. Many of them do.
We're the same way, we just on, different things.
Yeah, exactly. Philip Sharp says, do we know a RAIM announcement time yet? Let me finish the rest of his comment. I would say it's coming sometime in the next 2 days, though, right? Didn't Jeff say that?
Well, I believe, from what the online chatter, as you like to say, is that it will come out today.
Okay, yeah. I'd be lying if I didn't say I'd seen some of that online chatter. But he says, I know the consensus is Oklahoma, but I don't give up until the bitter end. Are we now to the point where it is the consensus that it's Oklahoma?
I believe the consensus is Oklahoma.
This is one of those things where
people picked up on your cue that since he's doing a commitment video, he's actually saying
I moved the market on that one a little bit once I said that about the commitment video.
Yep.
This is also one of those things where you've heard the phrase "no news is good news." In recruiting, that's never the case.
Yep.
When something goes really quiet in our state about a recruit, that's usually probably a bad sign. And boy, I'm not hearing anything as of late when it comes to that. So that's probably kind of a bad sign.
Two quick things before we go.
Well, let me just say one more thing about this.
Yep.
I'm sort of fine with 4 offensive linemen, assuming Georgia were to get Cedric Von Prawn. I think that battle becomes even more important when you lose that on Andrew Raym. And this is a loss, and there's no doubt about it. Georgia went after Raym and couldn't get him, which is kind of fine. I'm sort of fine with the 4 offensive linemen. Raym may go on to be John Hanna for all I know, but I don't even know why that name came up. But
he's generally regarded as the greatest offensive guard in NFL history.
I literally don't know. That was not a name I necessarily had floating around my brain there. So this is a loss. Georgia will probably wish it had him one day, but I'm just sort of fine. Georgia's got depth of the offensive line. They're going to have some good offensive linemen here. It's tackles they really need. They seem to be satisfying, that. Use this scholarship spot. Go out and get somebody else. I'm kind of fine with that.
And I'm probably going to write about this for tomorrow morning. Missing out on Ream, to your point, it is a loss. You can't say, oh, well, it's tough to pull a player out of Oklahoma. Then don't go and try and pull a player out of Oklahoma.
That's the battle you chose to fight.
The 2021 offensive line class, specifically in the state of Georgia, is looking very, very good.
Yeah.
There are a couple of big-name tackles, specifically Mims, Aramius Mims is a 5-star guy, number 1 player in the state. Micah Morris is a guy out of Camden County who's just, he doesn't know. He was at the opening that we were at back in March. He didn't know what he was doing. He's still really young and really raw, but when the light goes on for him, you're not getting around him. So, while, this might be a tough time, especially, when you factor in the Akinola Agumbi decommitment. But, 1, Georgia still has Sam Pittman, who's a great recruiter. 2, the 2021 offensive line class is loaded.
Yeah.
So, while, yes, it's a loss, there are bigger losses to be had on the 2020 recruiting
I apologize for not remembering. Who is that really big they're all really big that Georgia's in the mix for. The guy that visited a couple times, we used to talk about, we don't talk about much anymore. What was his name?
Chad Lindbergh?
That's the one. Is there any chance Georgia circles back around with Lindbergh now, I wonder?
Certainly think that's a case. As someone who has gotten Sintel's top targets for today's show already, for today's Before the Hedges show, 3 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m.-ish Eastern time. Lindbergh will appear on the seemingly ever-expanding names to know slide.
That's not a good sign then.
So
that's not a good sign.
Yeah.
Not that there's nothing wrong with Chad Lindbergh as a player, but if you're still holding out hope for Andrew Raym, that may not be a good sign that Lindbergh's name's coming back up on the show today. That may tell you all you need to know about that. But it will be fun, 3 p.m. Eastern time for Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. And if we just keep talking long enough, it'll be 3 p.m. So let me get off the air here. Before we go, I want to remind you to make sure you check out Atlanta News now at AJC.com. Some interesting stuff going on in the city of Atlanta for those of you kind of in this area. A more aggressive ban on smoking signed by Mayor Bottoms. You may want to check that out and really just go back to AJC.com throughout the day to find out about all the breaking news that's happening right here in our city. Those of you who live in the Atlanta area like me, check out AJC.com for Atlanta News Now. I'm sure there'll be a little bit of a preview of the second half of the Brave season in there, too. And can't wait for real baseball to get back going again after the All-Star break, which seemingly is way longer now than it used to be. But nonetheless, we'll be back to playing real baseball again soon. And then the AJC will have you great coverage of all that as well. So check out your Atlanta News Now at AJC.com. All right. For now, let's get ready to sign off. Huge thanks to R.S. Andrews for bringing the R.S. Andrews cool down to you. They really play all the positions: air, heating, plumbing, electric. A lot of you have a lot of those different kinds of needs. I do know that this time of year, though, the air conditioning is a big thing. So obviously get that Smiley $99 tune-up if you need to get your house cooled down. rsandrews.com online to find out more about that. Y'all have a great day. We'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow right here on DawgNation Daily.